Okay, so we all know what a creature feature is. Monster goes roar, people get scared, and sometimes it's a political or social metaphor representing our destructive nature. I've talked about it so much at this point that you're all probably sick of hearing about it. However, in stark contrast, you may not be familiar with the extremely niche subgenre that is hoodie horror. It's basically the British equivalent to a slasher and gangster flick, having a baby that grows up to wear nothing but baggy tracksuits with enough polyester to conduct more static electricity than Thor's fucking hammer. This unofficial title was given to British films that provoked a real societal fear towards urban youths and social decay, such as muggings, burglary, vandalism, gang violence, although it's relatively tame in comparison to America's situation, and the heinous crime of having to listen to that obnoxiously repetitive techno dance music being blasted at the back of the bus. It was a response to the UK's growing chav culture, which, despite its stereotypical connotations, was a derogatory way of defining lower-class youths demonstrating antisocial behaviour, which, when it wasn't related to crime, more or less came down to the perception of threat that they posed when loitering outside convenience stores, or, if they were feeling a bit more cultured, a Tesco Express. By the way, I realise that example will go over the heads of anyone outside the UK and Ireland, but bear with me here. While the concept of hoodie horror is a rare beast of a subgenre, it was essentially another extension to the kitchen sink social realism of capturing tangible fears of everyday crime, violence, and the domestic unrest of how close we are to danger, even in our supposedly safest environments. There are many genuinely haunting examples of hoodie horror, ranging from the psychological in Citadel, to the repulsively immoral in Cherry Tree Lane and Eden Lake, to the broader gang violence and hooliganism in Harry Brown, Green Street, and Noel Clarke's literal Hood series. However, these films, excluding the extremities of Eden Lake, commonly focused on the adult side of the culture, despite it largely being made up of, well, children. In simplistic terms, this culture was a symbol of how social deprivation perpetuated the vicious cycle of urban decay, with children ignorantly picking up on deviant lifestyle norms from the people and circumstances around them, where it became viewed as a somewhat accepted and normalized way of life. And when it wasn't all related to violence and immorality, it was the visual perception they cultivated that adapted a very antagonistic relationship with the public, due to not only its association with urban decay, but how it was reinforced by fear-mongering British media and the prejudices of upper-class cultures who seemingly had more power in society.
Excuse my French. They're fucking monsters, aren't they?
Here in Belfast, Northern Ireland, we call them spides, and throughout Europe and beyond, I'm sure they have their own wee silly names, so if you have any you want to share below, please feel free. But anyway, those familiar with this subspecies want nothing more than to see them get their comeuppance. So here's a film that answers the call by sending aliens to solve the problem of broken Britain. So let's talk about it. So, with that sociology lesson out of the way, it's interesting how out of all these hoodie horror films that were very explicit about demonstrating the terrifying nature of hoodie culture, who would have thought that one of the most observational, subtle, and surprisingly tasteful examples of the subgenre would be a film about a bunch of furry alien gorillas attacking a council estate in South London on Guy Fawkes night. I never thought I would say a statement like that out loud. Attack the Block gets a lot of spiritual comparisons to Simon Pegg and Edgar Wright's Three Flavors Cornetto trilogy, and it is a very justified comparison given writer and director Joe Cornish has an extensive relationship with those creators, and thus has the same comedic chops that allows this film to sit fittingly as a hypothetical spin-off if you want to. And it helps that Edgar Wright, Nina Park, and even Nick Frost are involved in the project. The story simply follows a gang of hoodie teenagers who kill a mysterious alien creature that crash lands on Earth, and soon end up being attacked and besieged by a surmounting army of said creatures. And that's honestly about it. It doesn't get any more complex than that, and thank God so, because like From Dusk Till Dawn's genre flip in the latter half, Attack the Block begins as a domestic horror based on Joe Cornish's personal experiences of hoodie culture, and is very quickly and literally invaded by a creature feature that somehow just works. Well, there's obviously a bit more to it than just works, of course. Joe Cornish wrote the story very carefully around relatable and thoughtful observations about working class Britain, interviewing youths about his fictional scenario in the hopes of capturing an authentic mindset for his cast of characters.
Jokes, man, jokes.
Like the Cornetto trilogy, while all the homage and parodies serve up a delicious pop culture feast, what the hell happened there? That was a real pompous film critic line, I do apologise. At the heart of the film is undoubtedly the realism of its distinct personalities. The film's authenticity benefits from the fact that Cornish selected the relatively unknown actors from local council schools, making for one of the most organic series of interactions I've seen in a British film in a very long time. Or at least one that's not a gangster flick. The actors are so incredibly natural with their linguistics, mannerisms, and attitude that, as cliched as it sounds, you don't feel like you're watching performances, but simply a group of lads who have known each other for years. Now, we do have to address the major asterisks to the protagonists, however, that being that our first encounter with them is through the perspective of Jodie Whittaker's Samantha, who gets mugged by them at knife point. So yeah, there's no getting past that these teens are terrible people, but to Cornish's credit, he does approach their ignorance with a certain sensitivity, I guess, in that you kinda have to realise that this is what they accept as their normal way of life in response to poverty and marginalisation. It obviously and rightfully never reasons with their behaviour, yet instead of projecting them as simply society's villains, it at least tries to acknowledge the roots of their deviance through the negligence they've experienced from both their parents and the state. In fact, as crazy as this will inevitably sound, it actually has a lot in common thematically with Candyman than any of Edgar Wright's movies. It's neutral on its perspective by guiding the audience through a residency suffering from the effects of society's prejudice and labelling theory, where instead of being a cesspit of despair, for every asshole there's someone genuinely kind and helpful. For as dangerous as this place is, we have to realise that some people just dealt a bad hand in life, and some become victims to the estate. Granted, in comparison, I don't think the film does a tremendous job at justifying its theme of marginalisation or even really explaining its own point, because, after all, we've got fucking aliens to deal with. I think what keeps the film from jumping into too much absurdity and pulling you out of it is how grounded the aliens are presented. Kinda like when I talked about the deadpan sense of humour in Troll Hunter, it seems Attack the Block's self-awareness stems from how committed it is to taking its alien premise so seriously. What I hate about every Shaun of the Dead wannabe is how overly quirky and on the nose they try to be, that it just deflates anything potentially dramatic about it. Shaun, for all its quirks, wasn't afraid to be brutally messed up when it needed to be. Its characters supplied the humour and the zombies supplied the horror, and so despite being littered with dozens and dozens of jokes, there was considerable dread and anxiety to accommodate the conflict. The reason Attack the Block stands out amongst all these other imitators is that it effectively follows the same comedic philosophy. It removes that comedy safety net that usually protects characters, and rather than set them up to serve as punchline dispensers, they're treated respectfully like real people with real emotions, with the danger itself feeling sincere because when these creatures mess you up, they definitely mess you the f*** up. Furthermore, the creatures themselves are designed with an animalistic nature. They're more or less an exaggeration of a wild dog, and because the CGI is so subtle and simplistic, they blend in so naturally that it's honestly hard to believe that they're even CG at all. Sure, they did use puppets and animatronics during production, but the fur physics and distinct use of pure black saturation contrasts with the color tones of the world that it helps reinforce that extraterrestrial quality to them. It plays well off the symbolism of early creature features. It isn't just some big scary monster for the sake of it. The creative team designed a creature that fits the context of the setting. It's a very dog-eat-dog world where you've got to toughen up and look after yourself or you'll be eaten alive kind of thing. This mentality then also plays into Bruce, who is some dumb university student who clearly comes from a sheltered middle-class background and is so out of place within this setting that he's just a walking joke to most of the characters. But you do feel pity for him. In fact, to be honest, he arguably represents the audience more than Samantha does, because for as much as I like Jodie Whittaker's performance, I do think her character is just a little too conventionally perfect, straight-faced voice of reason that she becomes a bit of a cliche alongside Hi-Hats and Ron, who themselves just fall into basic bitch gangster and basic bitch weed dealer. Actually, now that I think about it, those two are basically Americanized characters that are very one-note to simply add a secondary antagonist, and Nick Frost is there because, well, he's kind of an obligatory part of these kind of British comedies. Out of every character, John Boyega's Moses is a particular standout. I mean, I think Pest is incredibly funny and all, but for as simple as Moses' character is, Boyega adds a sincere sense of depth to his performance that is especially noticeable. The film is clunkily built around this theme of actions having consequences, and what we learn about Moses is that he's essentially living alone with his frequently absent uncle, just trying to fend for himself any way he can. It goes back to that commentary on marginalization. You're surprised to learn that he's only 15 years old. He's just a kid, yet it feels like he has the whole world on his shoulders and inevitably feels responsible for all the pain and chaos, being the one who set the chain of events in motion by killing the first alien, which happened to produce a pheromone that attracts the scent of the other aliens, hence why they're being targeted this entire time. I actually think the ending is wonderfully bittersweet when you put the film into context. Here we have a kid who is clearly misunderstood and lacks any parental or authoritative figure to guide him, hence he's fallen into a life of crime and delinquency, and despite effectively saving the day, he's still just perceived as another scum hoodie from off the street. In contrast, the community cheers him on, representing a togetherness that exists in these marginalized communities, showing that for all the bad that he's done, they at least recognize his isolation and show the kind of support that he's been missing in life. That's exactly where Cornish subverts this underground rise in hoodie horror. While he doesn't play them off as entirely sympathetic but deeply problematic, he at least tries to put across an understanding that help is needed to integrate them better into a society that's rejected them. They're dumb kids who can still learn and grow from their mistakes if time is given to help counter their behaviour. The film doesn't try to condescendingly provide a solution, of course, but instead it aims to simply not vilify them as unredeemable like much of media tends to do. They do occasionally show their innocence, even if it is masked by their defensiveness to look tough in front of their mates, which is brilliantly encapsulated in these two little brats who want to help Moses' gang fight the aliens, and the gang then proceeds to act like they're the mature adults in this situation.
No one is gonna ever call you Mayhem if you keep on acting like such a pussy.
While there's the constant fear that they'll grow up to just be another part of the vicious cycle of hoodie culture, where they are now, they're just kids who don't know any better. And if this was a film in the hands of a more judgmental perspective, they would all definitely be eaten.